Hey guys, I am going to give you a quick lecture here on resume writing. The last lecture that you had was about the career portfolio in general, and then this one is more specifically about resumes. One thing that you're going to notice is that today we're going to just talk about resume writing, but this PowerPoint presentation that I'm using I will post to our Brightspace page along with this video, and it has details about both the cover letter and writing sort of a profile for social media. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about resumes. Now, the first thing you need to know about resume writing is that every person you talk to that knows something about it is likely going to have their own set of opinions about what makes a good resume and what you should always do and what you should never do. And inevitably, if you ask multiple people, you're going to get conflicting responses. So case in point, if you were to go to career services, some of what I say, they may actually really strongly disagree with. And that's okay. Okay, so the perspective that I am giving you is one that I have found is good for English majors or other humanities majors. One gentle criticism of career services. They do a phenomenal job for a lot of my students. All of those students happen to be engineering and technology students. They know what to do with a student who is getting a degree in engineering and is going out to get an engineering job, right? For humanities majors, it is a lot more tricky, and there's more of a challenge to really highlight who you are and what you offer to a potential employer. And so that's why I'm giving you some sort of like the Susie Rumsey version of how to put together a resume. So basically, you guys know this, a lot of this stuff just intuitively, or you've heard it over the years. A resume is essentially like a snapshot, or it just captures you as a professional in a single document. And it also is displaying what you could potentially bring to a job that you are applying for. Remember that the purpose of a resume is not necessarily to get you a job, right? The purpose of a resume is to get you an interview, and that interview is where you score the job. It is rare for someone to actually get a job just from a resume. In fact, I don't know that I've heard of that happening very often. Okay, so other things that resumes do, you can see here on the list. I won't entirely read it to you, but it lists your attributes, your skills, your credentials, and your experiences that all should showcase who you are and what makes you a good fit for whatever position you're applying for. Okay, generally, when you are a fresh out of college person, it should be a single page. You should be able to condense it down to a really cohesive and tight, well-designed, as we talked about in our video lecture. I guess for you guys, it's week 6 that would have happened. That was actually earlier today, but anyway. It should be one page, right? Sometimes, though, you have enough, you've done maybe 2 internships and you had a real job at some point, or you're a returning adult student who has actual work history. A second page is not the end of the world. It is perfectly acceptable. In general, remember the design criteria that I showed you in our face-to-face video that we had last time on the CARP principles: contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. All of those things are incredibly useful, particularly in a resume, because it is a snapshot. You are trying to condense a whole lot of information in a very small space, and so good design comes in really handy. Above all, resumes need to be truthful, and they need to be carefully edited. Do not ever lie on a resume. You could legitimately not get a job or lose your job once you have it if it's found out. And the last one, carefully edited. If there is ever a document, I know you're all English majors, or at least most of you are, if there is ever a document that you have that is completely free of error, it needs to be your resume, and as a follow-up, the application letter that goes with it, but especially your resume. This is a document by which you're absolutely judged, not just as a potential employee, but as a person. Right? It is all about credibility. If you have mistakes, as if you are bragging about being good at communication and you are good at a lot of the soft skills that we've been talking about, and then you go and you have really obvious grammatical errors or that sort of thing in your resume, it's a really bad first impression. Okay? So if ever there was a document that needs to be perfect, it is this one. Okay? So let's move on. So then, let's see here. Okay. They should include a whole bunch of things. First off, you're going to need to have your contact information. Now, contact information for some of you is going to be as simple as your name, the address where you want to be known by or corresponded with at. I don't even know what the good what the correct grammar is for this, but you get the idea. If you have a professional address, you can certainly use that. For me, because I'm already employed at PFW and I was, say, using my resume to apply for something, I would use my professional address. You might choose to use your personal home address. If you're not comfortable including that information in sharing documents in the class, you can certainly just put in filler information that just says, someplace in Indiana, that kind of thing. Excuse me. Now, the other thing to know is that if you have other places that you are known, especially in social media, okay, such as a LinkedIn profile, if you have a website, if you have a Twitter account that's your professional Twitter account, include all those things. If your Twitter account and your Facebook account and your Insta account are more for, your crafting side project or your Etsy page or whatever, and it has nothing to do with the job that you're applying for, it's kind of iffy as to include it, but especially if it's just your personal page where you're just posting pictures of your cat, I would not include that information. Okay? You need to include relevant experience of some kind. Now, I'm going to point out later on, specifically for English majors, relevant experience may not necessarily be your job history. Okay, but you need to say how you're actually qualified, what you've done in the past that gets you to the point where you are now that makes you a prime candidate for the position. Okay, you're going to want to include your educational information. Make sure that you include that you're an English major and your expected graduation date. A lot of people include their GPA. My advice with this is simply that if your GPA is a 3.0 or above on a 4.0 scale, go ahead and include it. That's fine. If it's below a 3.0, I would probably maintain a discreet silence. Not because there's anything to be embarrassed about, because people go on to have fabulous careers with lower than a 3.0 GPA, but just because it's not the most shiny, sparkling thing that you have to offer. And why give them something to kind of judge you about if you don't have to? So I would say just maintain the discreet silence if it's lower. Okay. If you have technical skills that are relevant to the position, include those. Any memberships and awards. I think that was all for the should. Memberships and awards, those are the things you should include. Okay. The next slide is about things you might include. Okay. One of the popular things is an objective or an overview statement at the top of the page of who you are as a job candidate. These go in and out of fashion. You're going to find lots of advice. Again, this is one of the most conflicted things that you can find about resume writing. Should you have an objective? Should you include an overview of who you are as a job candidate? It's entirely up to you. One of the great adages is good designers design, great designers steal. Okay, so this is one of those times where going and finding samples online that you want to mimic, you're not copying the information because it's your information, but you find a style that you really like, use that. And the same thing goes for resumes. If you find one that just is the bee's knees and it just tickles you, then okay, great. Use that one, and it happens to have an overview of qualifications. Good on you. Do it. If not, that's okay too. Again, like I said, it's a really conflicted one. Sometimes they're going to include a list of relevant coursework, particularly for English majors, because you're trying to display soft skills and not necessarily hard skills. Coursework is a way to display that information. Volunteer work. I almost put this in that it should include volunteer work because I would say at least 75% of the time the volunteer work that you've done is relevant or interesting to a potential employer. For English majors, I'd put it even higher. Volunteer work actually shows that you have soft skills, that you've actually been out in the world and done things, and you aren't one of those stereotypical English majors that sits in a darkened room writing the next great American novel and smoking cigarettes, right? Nobody actually does this. Okay, if you have interests or hobbies, if they're relevant for the job, that's okay to include as well. Remember I mentioned before that if like your Insta and your Twitter accounts are for your, your little side Etsy place where you do embroidery, that's not really relevant unless you're applying for some place that really wants someone creative and that has visual skills as well as writing and communication skills. So that's a time when you might say interests or hobbies and talk about those things. If you have language abilities beyond rudimentary, it's okay to include them. If you are someone like me, I took 4 years of French in high school, 2 years of French in college, and a semester of, I don't know, overview French in grad school. But I would never have said that I was fluent enough to include French as any kind of proficiency, right? And so I would never have included it. If you are someone, especially if you have a Spanish minor, if you've done volunteer work using a foreign language, if you are a second language learner, absolutely include those things. And then lastly, communication abilities. Because again, you're trying to highlight soft skills, there might be a place to put something like this, but it might be, the category might just be called skills, and you include all kinds of stuff. Okay. So how long should your resume be? Most new college graduates, like I said, should have 1 page. If you have job experience, if you were in the military, if you have a secondary degree, it can absolutely fill a 2nd page. But I would say never longer than 2 pages. If you find that yours is going longer than 2 pages, absolutely edit it. The one time they get longer is when it's something called a curriculum vitae or vitae, depending on who you ask how to pronounce it. And those are what's used in academics. So I don't usually have a resume, updated resume. Instead, I have a curriculum vitae or vita, a CV is what we call them. And that is the academic equivalent. And mine is a healthy 7 to 8 pages, right? So it's a very different document than a resume. Okay, are there different types of resumes? Yes, there are several different types. I already kind of talked about the copy-paste version in the lecture that I gave in the previous week. I think I'll talk about it more here, but the 3 main ones still are the chronological, the functional, and the targeted. The chronological, functional, and targeted these are all still old school. One thing that I mentioned in the previous lecture is that a lot of times anymore, you need a resume that's a really slick-looking document, right? It's a document that if you were going to a job fair, you could hand to someone. It's printable, right? And looks tidy. But a lot of times you're going to be applying for jobs and you're going to need what I call the copy-paste version, right? And the copy-paste version is just all the same information, but ready for you to copy and paste into those cells on the intranet, right, instead of an actual paper version. So let's get into the types. Okay, so chronological is a really traditional one. This is the one that is the one that we automatically default to, right? It is best if your experiences show a steady progression over time. Usually you put work history at the top and then education, and then you have other stuff below that. Everything is in reverse chronological order. Now that's key, and something to keep in mind for all resumes is that in any category, if you have multiple things to include, they go in reverse chronological order such that the most recent thing is at the top. So if you happen to have had 3 jobs, the most recent one or the current one goes at the top. So this one's really good if it's just a normal, you've progressed through your career and that sort of thing. The issue with this one is because it shows, it's so focused on what you did every year since, I don't know, birth. I'm just kidding. But in the time span that you're offering them, is that things like special capabilities often get lost, and especially if you don't have a really steady work history or a relevant work history. You've been an English major and you worked at the infamous, Starbucks while you were in college. That's not going to show up as being impressive in a chronological resume. And so if you took a break and didn't work any place for some time, that's not going to show up. I would say for recent graduates, especially in your situation, education should probably go first and then job experience if you're doing this particular type of resume. Okay, so the next one is functional. Now this one takes the chronological resume and kind of spins it a little differently. This one allows you to highlight specific attributes that are your best. It doesn't necessarily show that steady progress of, okay, from 2000 to 2005 I did X, and then from 2005 to 6 I did Y, that kind of thing. Instead, it kind of takes all your entire experience as a potential job candidate, as a student, and then it parses it into other groupings that make logical sense. I would say this is probably my favorite one. This is the one that most English majors end up using. It does include an objective statement at the top. It doesn't have to. The education is brief without extraneous details, but then you have categories like technical, people, communication, administration. You might still have work experience, but more likely what you'll have is something called relevant experience, and then you'll have job history. Those are split into two different things, so that way you can show that you have relevant experience, but you maybe weren't paid for it, right? Like maybe you interned someplace, or you took Dr. Keller's multimedia class and you worked with Habitat for Humanity. Those sorts of things are where you're going to put relevant experience, as opposed to work history where you worked at a car wash and you flipped burgers at McDonald's and you became a barista, right? Those are two different things. One is going to highlight the real skill set you have. The other one just shows that you can be a good employee. Okay, so the idea here is that you'd come up with different categories. And like I said, this is my favorite one. I don't know that these are the right categories for you. This is kind of, this PowerPoint is sort of a crossover between my technical writing classes and now you're all English majors, so I'm kind of adapting as I go. Okay, the last one is targeted. Its advantage is also its major disadvantage. Okay, you zero in on a single goal. So suppose you want to become a professional editor, right? Period, end of story. So basically you take out everything from your resume that has nothing to do with editing, right? So you only talk about, well, you put in like your educational history, but it's a minor thing. It's an off to the side. Instead, you focus only providing information that shows that you can edit. So you might say relevant experience would include the editing class that you took and the projects that you did. It might include work that you did as contract work that you did to edit someone's dissertation or that kind of thing. It's a really narrow approach, and I find that this one I don't really recommend. You can look up and read more about it if you want. Employers often find it really strange because it doesn't look as much like a regular resume, and they can't find the information they're looking for, like, well, what experience do you have? And this one doesn't necessarily have that. Instead, it's like, I want to be an editor, and it focuses on those things. Like I said, it's really limited, but occasionally it can really work. Like if you are super passionate about something, and if you happen to have a bunch of experience that goes toward that, then this one might work for you. Okay, and then again, that copy-paste resume is the idea that those fancy ones that have good document design that use the CART principles, those don't always work great for copying and pasting into those little cells on online applications. And so the idea here is that you create a resume that removes all the formatting, and that way you have it ready to go. I give a couple things here. Let me read it. I think this second page. It's going to be longer than 1 to 2 pages because this is one that you're never really going to print or hand to someone. Its information is portrayed that can be easily copied and pasted without looking stupid. So like, here's formatting you could remove. Take out bold, italicized, and underlined fonts. Take out all colors that are other than black text on a white page. Any fancy fonts that you might have used, maybe you found a really like eye-catching way to have your name. No, bring it all back to either this is the classic Calabri or Times New Roman, Arial, something quote, quote invisible. Take out bullet points. Take out indented text. Make all the text flush with the left-hand margin, which for you guys is that way, okay? So anytime you tab in, again, when you copy and paste that into one of those cells, it can really muck up things and look kind of unprofessional. Take out any borders, lines, tables, anything that's likely to be affected by a copy and paste. So then what can you use to distinguish different sections? Headings, you could convert them over to all capital letters because, again, those will copy and paste just fine. Dashes or an asterisk would work instead of bullet points. Lists that are flush with the left-hand margin, again, are gonna copy and paste and look nice. And then sometimes converting to very short paragraphs or sentences could be useful. Be cautious of this because, again, remember, the idea of a resume is that it is skimmable. No one wants to read a paragraph of information about a job candidate. They don't have time for that. Instead, what they're looking for is a skimmable and scannable document. Okay, so here's a couple things that are special just for English majors, just for you. Okay, so remember that a heading like relevant experience is probably going to work better than work history, especially if your jobs have not been related to the field that you're applying for. So you've had a bunch of things that you've done, but none of them were paid work, right? Instead, you had to make, you were a college student. When I was in college, I worked as a florist. I was a florist actually for about a decade in a previous life, and I cleaned people's houses, and I worked as an assistant in the English department. And so maybe the job as the English assistant would have been relevant in a resume if I was moving on as like a professional writer, but the other two jobs, maybe not. So I might put relevant experience, so split up the two. The other thing you might find is that to save space, your work history might get shoved to the bottom, right? You might find that your volunteer work is actually where your relevant experience is. And so you can always make up your own category, like relevant experience and volunteering. That could be the category title, and then you put all those things in a logical order in them. So remember that you're trying to convey soft skills, the concept of things like communication, people skills, being organized, being a good team player, those sorts of things. Consider adding a section just called skills. And if you have that, you can include the fact that you are a competent writer, a competent researcher, that you have experience in different genres of writing, that you have done, you could also include technical skills in there, that you are proficient with all Word products, for example, Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. If you happen to have taken a design class and you know InDesign, that would be where to list it. And all those things if you just put under skills, it's sort of a blanket one that you can put a bunch of stuff in. That's also where you might put any language skills. Suppose you are fluent or semi-fluent in Spanish, that's where you would put that. You can also highlight your soft skills in something like your work history. So suppose you worked at, you worked at Target during school because you had to eat, right? But in that job, you found that you related to customers, you were commended for being able to communicate really well, so you ended up working like the service desk instead of just stocking supplies or working as a cashier, that you were sort of not promoted, but put into a position, or maybe you were promoted, right? You can list out that you made schedules, that you talked to people, that you organized people. You kind of get the idea. Okay, so again, that's a place that you can kind of highlight soft skills without listing them as I can communicate really well. Okay, another thing, and lastly, so if you don't have any relevant experience, this happens sometimes to English majors. You have just been focused on getting your coursework done and getting through school and paying your bills, right? And you're coming to the end and you're thinking, well, crap, I've got nothing, okay? It's time to gain some experience. Okay, I'll be blunt. You've got to get some experience. You can't, it is rare that someone can come fresh out of college without having some experience to find an actual position doing something that you enjoy. Right? You might have a family business, you might be lucky, but a lot of you aren't. So now is the time to gain experience. A lot of you, I assume, are graduating in May, so you've got time. You could volunteer next semester. You could do an internship, which is a really, really good idea. Contact Dr. Kate White. It is a class that you can take. You can take it for credit. She can help you find an actual internship where you do stuff for a real company or nonprofit, and boom, you have experience in your resume that's going to look really good. The other thing is if you're really desperate, you could think about including stuff for course projects that you did if you literally have nothing else to showcase. I would avoid that one if you were a graduating senior. If you're more in sort of the junior category of your schooling and you've got some time left, but you want to find a resume, find an internship, then including course projects and that sort of thing, that's a good idea to include to get that internship. And then the resume you spit out when you graduate, you get the idea, it becomes your professional one. I would say including your relevant coursework is a good idea, but note there that I said relevant and I underlined it. Most employers do not want to see that you took English 131, your basic composition course. That doesn't tell them anything, or speech, or basic math. Instead, what you're going to want to highlight is that you took, for electives, you took a business class, you took an accounting class, you took a professional writing class like writing for multiple media or technical writing or business writing, one of those sorts of things. You might also have taken a design class or a photography class. It's time to really think critically. If you're going for library science, if you took anything in computer science, that's a really good idea. If you're going for law, it's okay to list literature classes and history classes. Those are actually a really good preparation for law school. You get the idea, so think relevant always. And the last thing, this is a gentle nudge from me, your professor, is that you have skills. You are not... I've been talking about this since the start of the semester. Remember, we value the degree that we have, and now we're projecting into the future. So part of valuing the degree is valuing yourself and not doubting yourself and saying, I don't have anything, I don't know anything. That's bull and you know it, okay? Feel free to brag on yourself. If you sound cocky, someone in your peer review will say, hey, you sound cocky, don't, back it up. But for most of you, you're used to playing down and being kind of embarrassed about being an English major a little bit, right? Because they're like, well, what are you going to do with that? So this is your chance to actually showcase what you can do. Own your skills. Own the fact that you are extremely good at communicating in a world that has a lot of people who know nothing about it, right? Own the fact that you have a college degree and that you are employable, okay? So this is your chance to show it. Okay, that's it for this lecture. Remember that there are more slides in this PowerPoint that talk about a personal statement and cover letter, but I'm not going to go over it here. You can kind of come back to it next week if you want to. And as always, if you have questions, you can contact me by email. Take care. Bye-bye.